Hello, everybody. Welcome to Our World Today Viennese Perspective, the discussion where we discuss, I love that, where we talk about the news about the week and what happened and try to give a different perspective about that. Today, our program is pretty packed. We are going to have an analysis of Trump and Harris's economic programs with Isaiah and Sage. Then we're going to shortly talk about Israel and Gaza and the ceasefire that Hamas has accepted from the United States and the different components of it. We're going to mention a new type of energy resource, which is fusion power, and how it could entirely change our of carbon, basically, and be better for the planet. And we'll end up with Thailand, which has elected a new woman prime minister at its 37, so the youngest first woman prime minister of Thailand. So we are going to start right away with the presidential election, and I would love Isaiah and Sage to kind of summarize their analysis of the different programs of the two candidates and why it is important to have that in mind. I would love for you to give your opinion on this, especially because we are a little bit out of it as non-US citizens, not necessarily by choice, but we often learn way later the implication of the economic programs of the candidates and how important it is. We mostly talk about like the image, how they are Republicans and Democrats and their, their most extreme perspective, at least the media reports on that. So I think it would be good to just, ground, take a deep breath and try to understand their economic programs in a very simple way. So if you would like to just explain it to us first for you.
Yeah, so just recently, President Harris's campaign unveiled some of their economic policies that they are going to be implementing, or at least trying to implement when or if they get elected. They obviously it has to go through Congress and stuff, and be passed by them as a law, but basically for them, some of their priorities are basically you could kind of describe it as economically populist, meaning like really trying to do something for the people very directly in terms of lowering prices, increasing affordability on certain things. One of them is groceries, because that's kind of been a big a line that's been kind of repeated a lot in the news and just by people. I've heard it a lot from people, even just not just randomly, I've heard it a lot from people that they're complaining about how much food costs. And it's interesting because food costs have increased way past inflation. I think the most inflation ever got was 9%, 9.1% in the US during Biden's term. So year over year, prices increasing overall by about 9%. But grocery price inflation has been insane.
They're so expensive.
Yeah, it's been 12 to 20% increases in grocery prices, food prices. So the Harris campaign is thinking about this in kind of a Bernie Sanders way, and kind of saying the corporate greed is increasing the prices and we've got to put controls on it, as Bernie Sanders would say. So, but basically, that's what she's saying, is that recently there's been a lot of buyouts, corporate buyouts, and there aren't quite monopolies on groceries. It might be depending on like the area you're serving, like a more remote area. But yeah, basically these companies have kind of been buying each other out, and there are fewer and fewer suppliers of food, sellers of food who are competing. So the idea is because they're getting rid of their competition by buying them out, they can kind of charge whatever prices they want to charge because there's not going to be that competition, right? So this proposal from Kamala Harris's team was to basically give companies penalties, financial penalties for price gouging, meaning for like setting prices higher than a certain threshold. And the threshold being like, a certain inflation target, like how much it can increase, and what the company really needs to charge versus what they want to charge. Because their idea is that all they're doing is just increasing the prices because they can, because people can't avoid having to buy groceries. And it's just increasing their profits a ton and not, yeah, not helping people, obviously. So that's one thing. And there's a lot of debate and discussion about that. There's a lot of disagreement about that. The other major thing too for her was trying to reduce housing prices, because housing prices are like way higher, than they were like 50 years ago, let alone earlier, compared to people's household incomes. And so a big part of that has been there hasn't been as much of an increase in the supply of housing. And a lot of that has to do with zoning laws. And this could again be passed as a federal law, like some sort of change in zoning laws could possibly be passed, but it's kind of the principle of like, we don't want like too many homes being built in like cities and urban areas to keep housing prices up and to make them go up, because the whole principle is having a house in the US, at least, I don't know about in other countries, is like a huge investment. So homeowners want to see housing prices go up, but the question is like, I guess people are asking like how much is too much. So they might want to reduce those restrictive zoning laws so that more and more housing can be built, so the supply of housing can increase enough to meet demand, which is like, that's been an issue. It really hasn't been increasing enough to reduce prices. So, and that's more likely to work, because the other thing that she's proposing was to give first-time home buyers $25,000 to help with down payments on their houses, because you need a lot of the time a 20% down payment, which is 1/5 of the house's total cost. And that's difficult for people sometimes to save that much money. The critique with that is, if you're going to say in this housing market, we're going to give people $25,000 more for down payment, then people could easily everybody could just increase their housing, the price that they're selling their house for, by $25,000. And so it would basically be the government giving the sellers of houses $25,000, if a first-time home buyer is buying it. So some people are saying like, if you increase the supply of houses first, and that will lower prices because of more supply, and then you give the $25,000 down payment help, that would actually be effective. Otherwise, you would just be saying everybody can charge $25,000 more for a house.
Yeah,
so
there has to be a cap too. Like, it's almost like the same idea with the groceries. Like, how much do you need to charge versus how much is being asked? Like it should be, everything
Yeah.
needs to be, should be kept at like, what do you really need here and versus what you're charging.
Yeah, that's the idea with their campaign. So far, at least with those ones. Yeah. So, and then what did you guys think and feel about that? Or do you guys have any questions from your perspective?
Um,
You know,
I really enjoyed listening to you describe this. I have a better understanding of what price gouging is. It's actually kind of funny because most remote places like islands where I come from or some countries have a certain experience of price gouging on food, groceries, goods, gas, and even housing most of the time, just because of their geographical or geopolitical situation. So if that's something that's done well, it may be a huge, um, you know, a huge way of just changing about anything, from like, having the prices be like 25% up of what they usually are in other places for these places. And I think that's a good example of how the power of the US and the power of the citizens inside of the US can impact other people just by example in relationships. So that will be interesting to see. My feeling is that, and I don't know if Grenville agrees with that or has a totally different ideas. My feeling is that there is a spectrum of things that she's proposing, and maybe that's done on purpose, where the lightest of a proposal means that we can give power back to the consumers, which doesn't fall into the territory of trying to control trying to have control by the state. But the most extreme opposite way of this proposition is actually something that is trying to kind of control the state. Maybe that's why she people can like compare her to Bernie Sanders. And I feel like that's not necessarily how the US works unless like there is a complete ideological change about how you work. I doubt that some of these propositions are going to be implemented, but maybe she's smart, right? There may be a possibility because of the position that she's in right now, where pretty much just like, hey, I'm a candidate now, so might as well just, people want to count on me, might as well just propose some stuff. It's going to put people in that perspective of actually asking themselves questions about everything that is going on, trying to compare what is good for them and making a choice out of it. And I think there is some merit to that because she's actually proposing some stuff, she's actually proposing something. Which is where like sometimes people they talk with the programs and there's nothing behind it. And now we're actually seeing something that Obama kind of had down is having the ideological part down. So having the people that would already vote for you who maybe lacks your style, lacks your communication, but also having those who want to think logically and want to ask questions and so I don't know how successful she'll be into it, because like obviously that's going to be prone to start debates, and it's like I don't know if it's super solid, but there's something to it, I would say. I don't know if you guys agree, but that was my feeling on it.
So my sense is there seems to, at the core of it, be a level of greed, right? And I'm not saying the level of greed related to the proposals and their economic policies. I'm saying in a free market system, there seems to be some type of greed prevailing. And so economically, there should be some regulation about fair market value. Otherwise, the system is unintentionally allowing people's value to be eroded and destroyed. Like you can only a basket of goods costs that much. So if it's subject to greed inflation, that for me is a challenge. So there has to be a level of consumer protection if the market is not regulating itself. And especially under these circumstances where merchandisers or wholesalers are buying out other wholesalers and kind of creating monopolies in some of those environments, there has to be a form of regulation. And I'm using the South African example in that we have a Consumer Protection Act. And we have a consumer protection ombudsman specifically for these kind of things, because we know that a basket of goods 10 years ago was probably significantly cheaper than a basket of goods now. But the ability for people to service their basic needs continues to erode as inflation rises. So there has to be some regulatory body. I'm not certain that I'm comfortable with government throwing money at the problem. I'd rather much more say that government should be forming some type of regulation to say, well, this is how we propose to protect consumers in a free market system, because you do not want to get rid of the free market system. That kind of derives healthy competition where there is competition to be had. The issue is where there's monopolies, where there becomes a problem, right? But I'm saying that government does have a role to play in protecting the consumer, protecting the citizen from this kind of irregular behavior. So from that type of perspective, I would support some of these economic policies, but I don't support it being too dictatorial or necessarily throwing funding at things, for the reason that that funding has to still come from somewhere. Nobody prints money. And in order to have that type of currency in circulation, you either ensure that the economy feeds itself, or you devalue your currency so you can have more currency in circulation. So, it makes it very difficult. It's a very fine line to tread. But legally, from a regulation point of view, I feel like that's the more appropriate route of action. And it should, under these circumstances, be, I don't know what you would call it, if it's a national thing, because it can't be subject to each state deciding how to implement this. There has to be almost a national regulation to it, because otherwise you're still going to have pockets of abuse.
What do you think about that, Isaiah and Sage?
Granville for president. I
agree. Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good idea. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, there could be some truth to that. It could be effective. So some people worry anytime you make a price, could you set a price ceiling that in times of greater need, companies will produce less, so there will be shortages. Because like if you can only charge so much for a product, then you might just produce less, because you will incur too many costs if you try to produce enough, right, to meet demand, because you can only sell it at this much, so. But yeah, that's just the thing though. It's kind of like, it could also lead to reduction in quality too, because the companies could just be like, okay, well, you want us to charge lower prices? Well, then we're going to reduce quality. So it's just such a difficult battle. And I think ultimately, to we're not the Democratic Party is only partially articulating a vision of like a more permanent solution for this, which would probably be to help people upskill and go to jobs that pay more, and because the economy is changing, and a lot of lower paid jobs are getting like phased out. The wages have been like really stagnant, partly because companies can produce more with the help of technology. They can generate more value with the help of technology. There's a lot of reasons why like wages have been abysmally stagnant in the last 50 years. But that's like that right there, that problem, it's a huge economic change. And while it's partially addressed by like proposals of like making college more affordable and technical education more affordable, and you know, other things like that, it's not like they're not completely tackling it, because people are kind of just concerned about like right now. Like they're just like, please give me some help. Like I need help buying groceries. I'm sick of paying so much. I want to buy a house in my lifetime, you know. The millennials and stuff. So in their avocado toast, if they just stopped eating it, they would be able to afford a house. No, but you can afford a house, but it's like a difficult thing for people right now. So, and I understand that. So I don't know on the Republican side, unfortunately, the messaging has not really been there, because you know, Donald Trump has kind of veered away from talking about policy, and he's more engaging in like attacking Kamala Harris about different things, like personal attacks, right? And things like that. So it's kind of been tough to really know like what the Republican plan is. But I think some of the contrast is like Donald Trump, like one of his big things was cutting the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21%. So like slashing the corporate tax by 14%, and at least at the top bracket. So I don't know where that applies, but it was a huge corporate tax cut. And usually the idea is kind of like, if you make it easier to do business and you don't tax businesses as much, then the businesses will be able to expand their operations, create more jobs, that will raise wages and just improve society generally. And in at least since then, it hasn't been very long, but that has not occurred too much. So it's kind of like people are thinking, oh, like these tax breaks, basically they're just pocketing them. Like the companies are just pocketing them. They don't have any, they're not lowering the prices that they charge. They're not, you know, they're just pocketing them and investing them. And that's why you're seeing a lot of economic growth, partly too, is because it's just growth in the investments category, because you can throw more money at them. And so the investments are valued more. And that's not sustainable economic growth. So that's the idea. But so I think their plan would be to like raise the taxes, you know, back up to those previous levels to pay for this, because like you've got to pay for it, you know, somehow. So, but whether or not there's a lot of debate about whether or not that's a good idea, but it's just like two very different approaches going on right there.
It is for sure, and it reflects the, I guess, the spectrum on which they are in terms of economics. I would say just quickly, in a time of crisis and inflation, the company total has made like 11 billion more last year, with having like less employees and not less taxes. So I don't think that is going to be the sole, you know, solution that is going to reinvest into jobs. I think what you are all talking about, and this is so interesting to hear you talk about it, is that the free market is not a bad thing. The idea of capitalism at its very core and theory is not a bad thing, but it's never going to work if there is going to be some sort of block in the cogs. And basically, like, if an industry like the food industry or the entertainment industry gets to have the monopol of just about anything, it means that the free market has not done its job. If there is not enough variety, on the contrary, that people cannot produce enough in their companies, it means that it hasn't done its job either. However, we have more seen a direction towards monopoly than, the absence of variety. And so, price increasing because of price gouging and because of that. And obviously there is the question of like reinvesting into people, and I think that's where all the theory of the teachings of Union about life purpose can come into place to help people actually have a valuable type of income here. But it cannot be the sole thing that can like save the economy. I do think that if both parties were actually going in a discussion in the balanced way that the bipartisan system should be, there would be a solution found in both, tax decreasing and avoiding price gouging and things like that. And I think we would have like some sort of complete solution. There's no discussion right now on that. And we can be as analytical as we want, we can debate as much as we want, we can be from the left side of the political spectrum or the right side. There's not going to be anything that can actually solve this problem long term, as you were saying, Sage, if there is nothing actually going on in terms of discussion, like having a little bit of protection that doesn't feel like controlling the states, that wouldn't hurt anybody, or having a little bit of liberation of some of the economy that actually has been in a very stuck way for years, even decades, that wouldn't hurt either. That's all everybody wants. But it's just that the ideology or a feeling of like following an ideology is like blocking people from actually wanting to find solutions, and that's what irks me with this. But hopefully we'll get to a solution there. But yeah, I think hopefully Kamala Harris can be the representation of that. There's like, okay, like you guys, there are several ways to go about this. But if you want to go that way, you have to implement this and this and this and this as well, so that it works. I don't think her solution is quite complete yet. She's not totally in power, so that's normal too. But it could be. She could get surrounded by just the right people to help her, support her into doing that. So there maybe is a chance.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? The thing is about a balanced approach. So when you speak about a spectrum, it feels like it's people on either end of a continuum. And the solution to this challenge is somewhere in the middle. So you can't have an extreme in one way or another, in one direction or another. But there has to be a balanced approach that says we allow the free market economy to thrive while not cannibalizing our own citizens. Because the fact of the matter is, if you are going to put in significant price break points, you are the idiot. It costs so much to produce something. You probably reach a break-even point quite early in your production cycle if you're producing at the right level. So everything else after that starts to speak to profit. So this desire to win at the cost of other people is actually the problem.
Yeah, that's the thinking. And but we're all just doing our best to understand this. And so if anybody watching has any input, especially if you have some knowledge or facts about this, we would love to hear about it.
Yeah.
But this is just the best that we all know right now, based on just looking at everything and lived experience and recent history. So
I was just about to talk about that because Kristen said, I feel like bills like that are comparatively easier to pass. So do you know what she means by that? Bills like that.
Yeah, so it was related to the point around consumer protection and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So she literally posted it after I shared how South Africa does a level of consumer protection.
Right. Yeah, and you can confirm that South Africa is not necessarily a country where there is a lot of like the state trying to get into all of the economical affairs. I just want to.
Yeah, so we have a lot of regulation from a banking point of view, from a consumer point of view, and literally it's kind of it's a form of regulation, and I do believe that a form of regulation is required, because again, the price of production continues to increase. We get this, we understand this. And people are not expecting companies to completely absorb those costs themselves. Some of that cost will naturally need to be passed on to the consumer. But you can't then also go ridiculously inflate that cost because you want to maintain previous profit levels. The market has shifted. You have to shift along with it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for clarification. Well, we'll have to see about that. Hopefully there can be some meaningful discussions between the two opponents. Doubt this will happen, but maybe. And we'll follow that and talk about it in the next few weeks because the election is coming up. Whether we want it or not, like it's happening pretty fast, pretty soon. So I want to quickly mention that we have some sort of news about Israel accepting the ceasefire from the US, but I don't know if it's news exactly. You'll have to tell me. This is about the head of the Hamas movement, well, the Islamic Palestinian movement, and that's associated with Hamas. Accepting the deal that the US tried to make in May 31st, but accepting it at the condition, again, I think repeated from that time, that the things that Israel seemingly added to that deal would not be, not be accounted for, I would say. The problem with that is that I tried to dig with this because even though we haven't talked about Israel and Palestine for a while, we follow it closely. There is nothing about that deal anywhere. There's no information. What is in that deal? We don't know. Possibly like intentionally, but I feel like it was just so useless that so many people are reporting on this as if there is some sort of agreement already in place or improvement where we don't feel like there is anything. But that may be my personal frustration. And that's the only thing that I have on this. It seems like news, but there may just be something for us to look at as journalists right here. And I'm curious to know if either one of you has any feelings about that, anything that you'd like to share about it, that you've seen in the news, or just feelings to comments on what I just said. Grenville seems like he's deep into reflection.
Yeah, so and it's not a deep reflection. It's like I was actually just thinking about it, and the sentiment that you shared, that there doesn't seem to be any information available. That always presents a little bit of a challenge to me, because what is the best kept secret in this situation? What is not being shared? And I think we've spoken about it before when we've looked at what news is drawing your attention and what is it diverting your attention from. So, we kind of need to be cognizant that there could very well be other things afoot as well. And so that was the face that you saw. It was like, what's really going on here?
Oh, I get it. And I agree with you about what is actually being pointed pointed at in the media and what's actually going on, and maybe what we need to dig deep into and to try to see what we're not seeing sometimes as well. Isaiah and Sage, any comments about that? It's okay if you don't. It's like there's not much to go
I
on.
have no idea what's going on with that.
Yeah, and that's entirely okay. Hopefully, we'll get more in the future, because felt a little bit lackluster. Kind of like my feeling on it, since we're talking about media and our consumption of media and how news is received and what our attention is pointed to. I felt like I clicked on it and I was like so hopeful. And then I was like disappointed by a bunch of nothing. And I felt like there was no value there. And I feel like this is a problem that we sometimes have with media at the moment. It's just like, no, I feel taken from. Isaiah is laughing, but yeah, it's true. It's kind of my yeah, it's kind of how I see it. However, we can talk about things that are positive, and first of them, um, would be that Thailand has elected a new prime minister, and this prime minister is a woman that is 37. She has served in the army, I think, and we don't know much about her, but I think she's pretty much a very big Thailandese figure, that people are very proud to have there, and that she has good relationships with the royal family. And she just got endorsed by the royal family into the investiture, and it feels good. It feels kind of fresh. And she seems to have good support around her, so maybe she'll be able to have a good government going on there. I don't know if anybody has read about this news or has any comments, but just like the feeling of having like a young woman in here. That's not the first time we talk about a young woman becoming prime minister. We talked about it with New Zealand as well, but what's the feeling that you have about her election? Sage.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yeah, I guess it is a first for Thailand, but it's also kind of like a lot of things in Thailand behind the scenes or overtly are kind of like controlled by the military, and it's kind of like has like a back and forth relationship with democracy, but we'll see how she wants to lead. But like the thing about like she's the daughter of a former prime minister, right? Thaksin Shinawatra. And so she I don't know, she definitely could be in that same vein, because he was controversial because he was like could be like very authoritarian. And so I don't know if she would be different or not, but like I guess we're just going to have to see, because sometimes it might just be like a new face for the same thing, but not totally clear on that. So, but yeah, that's all I have for that.
Yeah, I agree. It's true. I was just going to say she's the daughter of Shinawatra, former prime minister. So basically, it's going to go one or two ways. We don't know what is the history of her election, just as she was elected, and obviously people are very happy that it's a woman, that she's so young and that she can represent part of Thailand. So Grendel, what do you have for us about that?
So my sense is we when we started out this year talking about the fact that there are significant amounts of elections happening in significant amounts of countries, and the potential shift in the political landscape globally, we are definitely seeing it play out, which in and of itself is a transformational energy, right? So the transformation could play out in a very good way or a not so good way. And I almost have the sense that it's positive. The shift is positive. The delivery on the potential expectation of that continued positive shift kind of remains to be seen.
I find it so interesting. There is something about this year that maybe you agree with or not, but like we had so many elections and nobody could have guessed, for example, that Biden would get out of the race or would have women in some of these elections. Mexico also has a woman now as head of government. And I feel like people are desiring of shifts and changes. They may be looking, I don't know if they may be looking at changes in terms of like the physical representation of those changes or actual changes at the core or both. And I think that's a little bit what these women are represented with, sometimes the way that they come into power. So basically like Harris coming into power as a natural, successor of Biden, getting out of the race. And Shina Rastra coming into power, but already being in politics by her father. There can be good to that. Not to say that it's bad, but hopefully, like the people are choosing real change, not like, superficial change. So we'll have to keep an eye for that as well. But I think it's interesting, and I really like the way you analyzed it, Grant. Also, thank you for that. Just say, did you have something to say else? Yeah. All right, so we are going to our last topic, but not least. And Grendel is going to talk to us about fusion power. So basically, how the fusion of atoms and chemical elements that are even smaller can help us produce energy potentially and use that energy in a way that can completely change our lives, which means that carbon and nuclear power won't be used as much or not at all. which in turn is going to completely change the way we consume electricity, change our carbon imprint on the world, and change our way of life potentially to something more eco-conscious. So, Grendel, would you mind summarizing a little bit what you have from your research so that we can discuss it?
Oh yeah, so you kind of gave a little bit of a summary already. So my disclaimer is I am not a scientific person. So please, if I misquote something out of context, please feel free to correct me. To our audience, please feel free to share insights that we may not be able to share through our discussion. But in essence, what fusion power is creating a reaction that merges nuclei from two atoms, and that new nucleus is lower in mass than the previous two. So the excess is turned into fusion energy that can be harnessed for power production and for usage in the generation of additional energy. So the idea is that there are certain chemical compounds that naturally occur, like in seawater, or other compounds like the production of mercury that feeds these reactions. But these reactions, they occur at exceptionally high temperatures, so they're not as efficient as they can be right now. So nuclear fusion research is generally it's still in its early stages from producing reasonable results, but the actual start of nuclear fusion research dates back to like 1940 already. So it's been around for quite a while. It's just that the failures have led to advances in terms of using lighter compounds and finding more readily available compounds. And one of those compounds is obviously found in seawater, which is more readily available around most countries. The challenge is that the technology to produce fusion reactions is more concentrated in the kind of global north, where financial resources are much more available, but the need for cleaner energy is a lot more prevalent in the global south because of the level of underdevelopment. So there's kind of this balancing act that's required that says, some of the compounds are in the lands of indigenous people. So there's environmental concerns, and because of those environmental concerns and geopolitical concerns, it could very well be open to the formation of monopolies, which makes it a bit more challenging. It also makes it a bit more challenging from a sustainability point of view, because we're also looking at the preservation of indigenous lands. So kind of all these relationships that start to form as we start to look for these minerals are going to need a lot more finessing. But then once we get to the point where we start to produce fusion power, we're also going to have to finesse the distribution of it, because we're sourcing in one place, but we're benefiting in another place. So the sense is that we have to guard against abuses from an environmental point of view, from monopolies point of view, from an energy distribution point of view, as these advancements take place. And again, you're just like with the regulation of space of weaponry in space, satellite weaponry in space, and those kind of things, it's probably much smarter to consider the architecture of that regulation now, as opposed to waiting down the line where we have to then solve for abuses, where we can kind of get out in front of it and say, this is the standard that we want to live by, and this is the standard that we want to design in the pursuit of fusion power.
This is interesting, because how we are falling back again on discussions of monopoly and the balance of power and balance in general. I would say my ideal solution for it would be, like a year ago or a year and a half ago, we were talking about how indigenous people were finally invited into international tables of discussion of how to manage the land and how to build an economy of resources that is appropriate for certain countries. I think Ecuador was doing that and Brazil as well, but I don't remember. And I think we should have that type of discussion as well in all of the global meetups between countries, not just at COP28 and 29 or and however over we're going to have, but all of them, even the most political and geopolitical, find a solution with them about how to manage the land and how to manage the resources, and also in a way that is going to benefit both the North and the South. So something that is going to globally be okay for everybody, because even if the North has resources, I bet that people that are, struggling to buy goods and foods at the moment will also be happy to have a solution that also meets their needs, even though they're in a country that is wealthier. So yeah, that's just my feeling on that. But globally pretty positive, I would say. The challenges in terms of technology, well, we already had them in the 80s, and we've obviously made some progress by now. So I just hope that we'll continue making some progress, and I don't doubt that we'll continue making some progress. So the questions, and thank you for bringing your attention to that, are indeed actually on how we will harness and manage that power, not in energetical resources term, but in terms of like our relationships between countries and between producers and consumers. So again, an economic question and political question.
Yeah, and the other thing that I also want to just add is there's also the sentiment that as we find solutions to the climate challenge and everything else, that we must guard against becoming lazy about shifting our behavior to contribute to those changes, because we believe that there will always be a technological fix. So we must avoid assuming that technology is going to solve for bad behavior.
Right, yeah, avoiding repeating patterns in other ways, for sure. Yeah, but I think like our technological progress isn't quite enough to prevent us from having ecological consequences by 2050 and even now. So hopefully that will also make people, act for better patterns and processes in the future. So Isaiah and Sage, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess, well, I think the power generation is actually how power is generated is really important in terms of like reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and stuff. So I think the technological breakthroughs will still be really important, but there are other sectors too that contribute a lot to greenhouse gases, like the production of cement, or concrete, and like there are ways to produce it that produce less greenhouse gas emissions and stuff like that. And I feel like it is very technological. Honestly, the solutions or big investments would have to be made. Like for the US, like if you wanted to reduce reliance on cars, for example, it would be like this massive investment in like public transportation that we just don't have, except in like a few cities. So, but I don't know, but I feel like this has to do with like healing the feeling that life is limited and that something outside of us is our source, because we can definitely unlock unlimited energy because we know that that's really how the universe works, that it's abundant. I feel like it's about healing that and not feeling like you have to take from yourself to get something, like take from the planet's health or take from like a limited resource in order to like have power, energy. So yeah, I think that's a work in progress, healing that. And I think that's cool. And I guess to pose a question, I was wondering, like, would it be beneficial for the countries developing the fusion technology to help developing countries get fusion energy plants so that as they industrialize, they don't contribute a lot to greenhouse gas emissions? Like, would that be a beneficial thing, and would it be fair and just,
It would be the best course of action to already like put them into the mindset of building for this new technology and the new way of producing resources. However, and I don't know, there is not necessarily a fault there, but historically what has happened is that countries that needed the most of these transitions from the South, they said to other countries from the North, like, hey, you were doing this for decades, now let us enjoy doing this without asking questions. And possibly they were doing this because in international meetings, the North was saying like, we need to stop now. And the people from the South were like, why stop now? We just started. Even though like potentially like the technology that we have right now makes so that the quantity of emission that they do is like way higher than, and they have caught up already, probably. And then with the fact that there is this economical problem and that the North probably won't want to pay for that pricey development for other countries. So there is going to be a big work about putting pride aside to kind of work into harmony for something there. Not sure what is going to happen, but a global foundation for producing resources could be our solution, but like resources production is pretty much divided by countries at the moment. So yeah, we'll have to have a whole lot of change about how we see our relationships together for that to happen, but that's just my opinion. Any last words on that?
So I agree with you. I definitely believe that something like the climate challenge is a global enough imperative to drive cooperation. because no one country is going to benefit in isolation if there's a positive shift. And literally we create scale by partnership. So the best way to do it is in cooperation. And given that part of it is in response to the intermittency of solar and wind power because it's so dependent on the weather and all of those kind of things, the global imperative to find a cleaner method of energy production is literally almost honoring the desire for life of the planet. So I think that just that alone underpins the requirement for a significant amount of cooperation.
And I think we started that, but sometimes it's good to remember that we need to love even more in a place that we even thought was possible. But yeah, that's a lesson for long years and another day as well, because we are at the end of our discussion. Thank you to everyone who has watched us from Facebook and has participated in our live, and thank you to everyone who's watching us from YouTube. If you love what we do here, or if you'd like to contribute, please comment, like, share, so we can do more of those. And we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.